Hi, everybody. Welcome to Art School Live. I just realized I didn't have my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I want to make sure I give you my full attention. Welcome to Art School Live with Eric Rhodes, minus Eric Rhodes. He is still traveling in China this week. I think he's been there. This might be week 4 almost. So I am so happy you're joining us for today's show. For those of you who don't know me, my name is 𝗪𝘁𝗲𝗏. I have been with Streamline for 13 years and occasionally get to fill in for Eric on this show, which is so much fun for me. I was just telling our guests today that I don't get a lot of time to paint between work and kids and all the other things. So getting to host this show and hang out with artists and get to learn from them is the highlight of my time hosting this show. So without further ado, we are going to bring in our guest here in a moment. This artist she's originally from Poland and she's living in Ireland, and we are going to welcome Kate Kos. Hi, Kate. How are you?
Hi, Karen. How are you?
I am
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on this show, for taking the time out to do this, because I know you are very, very busy. What are you going to be sharing with us today?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick demo in gouache paintings, and I'm going to show you how I work with layers. So I painted with watercolors for so many years that kind of skewed my way how I was painting in gouache. So I'm just kind of developed this system that I want to show you, in very simple steps.
Well, I think that's really good. As I was telling Kate earlier, I have just started to paint with gouache, and coming from a pastel background where you don't mix paints, you just buy all the sticks that you want. I have been learning how to color mix. And so painting with gouache, I found is very, very difficult. It dries light, dries dark, or things just don't work out that way. So I've heard that layers actually are a really great way to approach gouache. So I am excited to see what you're going to share. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and start this show.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes. Now, here's your host, Eric Rhodes.
Except it's 𝗪𝘁𝗲𝗏. Welcome to Art School Live. Eric is traveling in China again this week. He should be back, I think, either next week or the week after. So you'll get to see his beautiful face here very soon. Thanks so much for joining us wherever you're watching from in the world. Today we have Kate Kos. I actually didn't realize I don't know how to pronounce her last name. So welcome, Kate. She is joining us from Ireland, and she is going to be showing us how she works with layers in gouache. So Kate, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, Kerry, I also don't know how to pronounce your name, but Kos is correct. It's a Polish name. It actually means blackbird. So what I'm going to show you guys is the simple scene I painted so many times over. It's my comfort spot. I go a painter all the time. And, I just thought for a demo it would be a nice one that I kind of could nearly paint from my memory. If only the light was always the same, because every time you go and the reflections and the light is different. But I don't know, do we have, Carrie, the photo on the screen that I'll be using?
Thank you for reminding me. So everyone, if you're watching, our producer Amandine is on a much needed vacation. So I am running this show, and clearly not as good as Amandine. So there we go. We've got that image up for you of your boats.
Okay, brilliant. So I've sketched it a little bit, but I just generally do not sketch that's, try not to do like a tight sketch, because then it does forces you to put more detail, I think. So I just generally do a very loose sketch. And with the ways I work with layers, sometimes you just don't see it afterwards, after the first layer. So if you come from a watercolor background like myself, I painted with watercolor for 10 years plus, and that was exclusively with watercolor. So you kind of so conditioned to paint from light to dark, to preserve your white, so you're kind of afraid of your white paper. And when you transfer to gouache painting and you start this totally new medium, you're still painting on watercolor paper. Obviously, there are different substrates you could use, but most of us gouache painters would use watercolor paper. I use mine. I actually glue it to like a mount board, just so it's more stability, and also soaks in all the water quickly, so it dries quickly.
Do you use cold press or hot press?
I use cold press. So I use exactly the same paper I used when I was painting with watercolor, I just started, gluing it to a board so it never buckles.
Okay.
So then what I did, so I noticed when I painted it with gouache, it's not really what I've seen and what I like in other gouache painters. So then I started painting it totally different, like you would with acrylic painting. So basically, very thickly, using very little water, and then layering on top, and building a painting that way. And, this is a technique that lots of artists use as well. But then I just kind of missed the kind of accidental mix of the washes. Like I've done a little kind of test of colors when I was doing here. Like I love what watercolor can do. And gouache can do that too. You can kind of see how the colors blend in together. You don't have to like mix them in. They just mix on the paper. So I wanted to have that. But like if I started working with light, then I ended up having this kind of more like a watercolorly look. So I started starting a painting and using a lot of dark colors for the start, So in this example, what we have, the boats, the reflections of the boats that are in the water, they would be the first layer I'd be worrying about. So I'd be applying color maybe for the sky first, and then for the reflections of the water. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So first I start with the sky. I'm not wetting the page like I would in watercolor. So I'm just using watercolor brush. And this one is a synthetic one, but it could be, because it's just a small size, so it doesn't need to be a natural hair brush. I have so many watercolor brushes. And I'm just going over everything because, with gouache, with that lovely idea, knowing that you have your white color and you can actually, you don't have to preserve anything. You can actually cover up anything. I love thinking about it. That's the freedom, and that's why I think I enjoy gouache so much. So I'm gonna drop in some, like as you would in watercolor, I'm gonna drop in some kind of darker clouds because I see that in the picture. And obviously I have very little control of how this is gonna go, because of water and the gravity. And I'm going to mix some colors now for the reflection. So I'm going to use some blue, and I have burnt sienna here as well. That gives a nice little dark color. I don't know if you see my palette because I can't see you guys now. And then I'm going to also add a bit of yellow and blue. So I have like different colors on my palette that I can freely pick up and mix with them. And I'm gonna add also a tiny bit of white into it. So like I'm not using this. I know lots of artists don't want to use white until very late in the painting, but I like that kind of murkiness sometimes in the water. So I think it's I have a good case to use it. So
it's a very interesting approach, because most of the gouache artists I've had on the show, the majority of them have been oil painters. So they're approaching it more from the opaque side of things. And so it's really interesting to see you approaching it from more of the watercolor side of things.
Watercolor, yes. And like I've never painted with oil. So I painted a lot with acrylics for some time, but I never painted with oil. So
I haven't either. I keep trying to get the effects of oil, and obviously that never works because there's just not the same. It's not the same. There's no medium, and it's different.
But I feel even like some oil painters are not really good at selling it, because they would just say, "Oh, I don't know, it gives me a headache when I paint," and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Like it's just they're not really selling it very well.
I know. Well, and then you look at all of the the mediums you got to have, and you got to have the paper towels and the gloves and all the things. And I want to try to be as minimalist as possible. So this is definitely something that's a little bit more achievable than having to carry around all that stuff.
Yeah, and transforming the painting, I think, as well, to home, to your studio, because if you're painting and somewhere far and you're going into your car, like I just can only imagine what my car would be like if I bring some wet paintings. Well, I suppose it's the same like with anything else. You just have to kind of figure out the system and stick with it. So you can see how dark I'm going in the first layer, and I want to kind of finish softly, so I don't have that sharp lines, same as you would with watercolor. So I just added some water to help it spread. It could be a mistake. We'll find out. So continuing with darker colors, and there would be the reflections are getting darker when you come in closer in the foreground. So I'm even adding more blue into my mix just to darken it again.
I don't have a lot of water around here, so I never have even thought about how the reflections change. I just assumed they were all the same color.
Well, it all depends. So sometimes you get this lovely light green underneath the boats because, like, if there's sun coming a certain way, and it I don't know, it bounces of the whiteness of the boat, and then it kind of, I don't know how it happens, but sometimes you have this beautiful green color. So depending on the day, really. But yeah, no, I love painting reflections, so I keep looking at them and finding something there. I can barely see my sketch, so that's why I usually sketch. Sometimes I add sketch later, you know, I do a first layer and then I sketch it with like watercolor pencil or something. So I'm gonna switch. So I was painting with watercolor brush, and I'm gonna switch now to actually a gouache brush, which is well, I don't know if there are gouache brushes there. I haven't actually came
I
across.
have not found any
No.
specific that are specific for that. They use a lot of either watercolor or acrylic, depending on how they're approaching the
Oh,
painting.
well, yeah, exactly. What are you looking for? So yeah, I always find some kind of cheap, inexpensive little brushes that, you know, because I find if you're painting it in a you would with a gouache or with like similar acrylic, then in opaque way, it just doesn't matter how much water you have on it. So it just doesn't matter about brushes. Like as a watercolorist, the brush is everything. But
Yeah,
yeah, I kind of enjoy that, you know, I can buy a cheap brush and still paint
interesting.
with it.
I have not. I've always used acrylic brushes, unless I'm putting in like an under wash. I've always used acrylic brushes. I'm gonna have to try this with watercolor brushes.
I think you can do both because, like, if you just do watercolor, like gouache is different than watercolor. Eventually, like, if I continue painting layers that are very thin and watery, and the water on top will reactivate the paint on
Right.
that already on the page, and will be just lifting it. So if you just go a few times with a brush, in the second layer, it will actually will lift it. But with watercolor, it soaks in, so you know you kind of do it that way, you know, and it's fine. So watercolor, you have to be more careful, but I think you can do both. You can start with watery layers, and then you can continue adding um, darker or more opaque layers, not necessarily darker. That's the whole point. So you can see it's already drying into light. It was looking so dramatic, and I always feel like, oh, I'm going too dark. But then when it dries out, it never is too dark. You can always darken it again. So I love dropping in a little bit of kind of more watery mix, so you create those little accidents, because that's what I always loved about watercolors. So like trying to keep the same things I loved, and what I hated is maybe hate is too strong of a word, but what I I enjoyed it actually, but what I dislike is all this planning. And when I started painting then with acrylic, I found that, you know, it gave me this freedom that you didn't have to know what the painting looked like until you actually, you know, paint it. With watercolor, all this kind of sketching and, you
Mhm.
know, preserving everything, you know, you kind of get sick of it.
I tried watercolor. I thought I went on vacation and thought, hey, I'll try watercolor because it's easy to carry with me. It'll be great. But coming again from the pastel background where you put in everything dark first and you end with your lights, I approached that with watercolor and realized very quickly that it's not the same thing.
It's not gonna work.
No, it is not. I had a very vibrant painting though, but it did not look like a watercolor painting.
But you see, that's the thing that is, you know, but I think when we think watercolor, we think this really kind of, you know, the paint does its own job on the page, you know, you let it. But then when we go painting, we have a tendency to trying to control it. And I think it's like with everything, you just have to let go.
Yeah. Letting go is the hardest part.
So I'm going darker and darker in here. So I'm dropping it into kind of half dry I suppose it's nearly half, well, it's dry, half dry, half wet paint. And I can see I sketched the boys here. I don't know
Mhm.
what, no, they're not called the boys. They're called something else. Anyway, I
Um,
painted, do you know?
I would have thought buoys too, but the only thing I could think of is bumper. I know that's not what it is, but that's what it's supposed to prevent from bumping.
Fender? Fender? Fender?
We'll
Maybe
just call
Fender. I
yeah,
don't know. I've asked about it before, and I'm not a sailor. I painted so many boats, a little thing I learn all the little parts within the coat, but
yeah.
no, not yet.
So how long
Okay.
have you been in Ireland?
Well, I've been in Ireland now. This is 21 years. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
so I came in as a student, and I never left. I
That
was
was
studying.
Yep. I moved to Colorado for college and never left.
Oh yeah, the same. Well, I studied in Poland, but I came in as a student, as a kind of for a summer job, and what happened is, I basically fell in love with the place, and already I was studying architecture, and I already had the inkling that maybe it's not for me. And then I suppose I kind of thought I'm gonna give myself a holiday, and I'm gonna stay a bit longer, maybe a year break, and never came back.
Oh, so somebody just posted in the comments. It is called a fender.
The Fender, yeah, I was thinking that I heard it before. Um, I'm going with another very watery layer, and I'm gonna do a bit more detail for the houses. So my sky is nearly dry, or is dry, I should say. Well, now it's also dry and dirty. Um, and I'm just gonna go over it. So I'm trying to do it in a loose way. So I'm not limiting myself, try and go around the windows like you would with watercolor in a totally different way, just painting this whole as a one block. Mm. So this time I stayed with the small brush I'm using, which is, this one might be watercolor, I'm not sure. But basically, because it has nice little sharp edge, it's flat, it allows me to do a lot more, with it. A lot of my brushes look, you can see I'm not really treating them well. They're all kind of destroyed because I leave them in the water and then, get this shape. But I continue with them. I find like with watercolor, I had brushes for so many years and they lasted very long. And then with gouache, you kind of, it's harsher on the brushes,
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
You know,
So Carl is asking, do you want the drying times between each layer to be consistent?
Oh, that's interesting. Um,
Does it really matter? Or you just kind of like wait until
Yeah,
it dries and then
just
move on?
like most of my gouache paintings would be outdoors, and you know yourself. I don't know if you paint outdoors, Gary, but it's just like a roller coaster. You can never predict things. Sometimes it could be someone coming over and wanting to chat with you, and then you've kind of lost. You have to layer dried, and haven't even finished it. And then other times, it's so hot, it just by the time you get halfway to the page. I kind of like it a little bit more messy, I suppose. You can see in here I'm dropping in a wash, and I kind of knew that wasn't dry enough. But I like a little bit, taking the risk like this. And not always they work out, but this is gouache. I can cover anything with
Mhm.
more opaque layer. I don't know if that answers the question or not. But yeah.
And so how long did you paint in watercolor, and then why did you make a switch or decide to add gouache?
I painted just exclusively with watercolor for 10 years, and it was a fascination. I haven't really done any, like, I wasn't interested in oil. I got an oil set. I've maybe done one or two paintings, and I thought, no, watercolor is better. And I
Mhm.
was only interested in watercolor painters. But after a while, you know what happens? There's no more techniques you can learn. And you just, like, I'm like every other artist, I just want to learn something new. So the new thing became then acrylic. I just thought, oh yeah, it's mixable with water. I can just, um, just do what I'm doing, and just use water, and just it's cheap. And so I painted with acrylic. But acrylic, outdoors, it's not a great medium. Like watercolor isn't ideal because it's just harder to control than you say your oils or gouache. But it was doable. But I found, I don't know, with acrylic, I just could not get a set that will work for me, or a setup that will work for me. So I continue to like finding something, and it wasn't working. So I was then still painting a bit outside with watercolor, and most of my studio paintings were acrylic. And then I suppose I always had gouache set, and I used it like, I don't know, maybe if I was doing a sketch or kind of quick sketch for a commission or something like this. And then one time I just thought, I'm just not painting watercolor outdoors anymore. I'm just going to take gouache and see what happens. And I just found out it's actually much better, you know, even like if it's raining or
Yeah.
it still dries it dries actually quicker than watercolor because you can use less water. And because of the, I suppose the board and the substrate I'm using, it's so thick, it can take more moisture as well. So that's right.
Have you played around with other surfaces? I love experimenting, so I've painted on a ton of different things, but is that something that you enjoy doing, or you just pretty much stick to the watercolor paper?
Well, at first I painted just on a paper the way I had it from watercolor, and then I've used a couple of different mediums I've used for uh, acrylic painting. So I don't remember even what they were called, like those pastel ground or something like this. So I used that, but all sorts of different kind of finishes that would give me. But I found, the gouache needs to soak in, the moisture from it needs to soak into something, and it has to be absorbent. So then I started Googling it, and I know in States you guys have illustration boards, but I could never buy them anywhere in Ireland. So I started just experimenting and trying to make one myself. So
Interesting.
that's how I ended up paint gluing, and now my assistant is doing all the hard work. But it took us a while to figure out how to do it, and like we use a matte medium to glue it, because like the different types of glues, they just weren't strong enough, in a way. And then it has to be archival if you're using it for your painting. So I mix some white now, and it's still quite watery. It's not, it's not very thick, so I'll be able to see some stuff underneath. And I switched to the kind of pointed synthetic brush. I think it'll be easy. I'm probably gonna have to do another layer on top of it. We'll see. Just adding a bit of. Once I add these bows, you'll be able to see maybe how the painting is. Where's everything?
Sorry if I'm quiet, it's just because I'm enthralled watching you paint.
That's okay, Chloe.
Is this 9 by 12?
Is that number 12?
No, the painting,
No.
is it a 9 by 12?
Oh, I don't know. I just cut it out like really randomly. And generally I think in centimeters, because that's how I was raised in Poland, and I suppose that's our units here.
No weird country that doesn't like to use that system.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. I suppose it's like how I think what you were used as a child, or how you start with it, I think it stays with you. There's even people that change currency, and they just kind of calculate everything, in their head, to the
Right.
money. And so on centimeters.
I saw this funny meme the other day that talked about how they were comparing a blue whale size to like the number of football fields. And the joke was that Americans will use any sort of measuring system except the one used by the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, but like if you buy materials, sometimes in art shop they would be, like say, popular size that I like to work with, it's 40 by 40 centimeters, and the closest to that would be 16 inches. So then sometimes I don't have 40 by 40 available because I don't know why, but then I just buy 16 by 16. So I kind of know a little bit like that, but
Yeah.
I always have to change it in my head into the proper measurement. I lived a little bit in Chicago, so I had to change for a year or so, and my family there. I had to switch. So I'm adding this color is lighter because that's how I see it on the picture, and probably it's just gathering more light reflected in the water. And this one is a little bit, this boat is darker, but you know, it will, you see how it's drying out already into darker color, because that's gouache for you. You just have to know your paints. The lighter color dries into darker and then darker into lighter. So like you're never really happy. And you never really know what's going to happen on your page. So I'm just going to start building up a little bit more in here, especially because I have this color I can use in there. So that what I would consider this one as a second layer, because the first, well, I suppose this could be first and that on top second, but you know, in my head, just trying to simplify it in a way for myself. It's a second one. So it's a little bit, you know, more milky, um, milky kind of mix, you know, let's call it that. And you know, it has white, so I'm starting adding some white if I need lighter color. So I'm developing totally different colors on top of it. And like, if you see the picture now, most of it is really, it's this lovely blue water with loads of movement in it. So it will be much lighter. And it gives me such pleasure to paint it lighter color last, you know, after painting so many years in watercolor. That's why it had to be the first one, you know, you thought about.
Paul is asking, have you ever tried casein? That, I assume that's how you say
No,
it.
I never did. No, like it's just not available for me.
I don't even, what is that? I've never used that.
I actually don't know yet, because like it's not in the art shop. Is it something you maybe you make yourself? You know, is it
Okay,
based
well,
on-
Paul, you're gonna have to tell us in the comment
yeah.
what that is, because neither one of us
We
know.
get Paul on the podcast and get him to explain and teach us something. I know there's a couple of artists that would have maybe prominent on YouTube, and they would paint in cousin, but I never dug into it. Like the same as with watercolor, I find like if I'm fascinated with one thing, I just have to feel like I've gave it all. You know, I gave it all my energy. I've learned all the technique there is until I switch to something else. You know, some lighter color here. Switching to smaller brush again. I love how these kind of colors mixing in here, but I'm gonna have to probably go darker. I'm gonna leave them for now and see, maybe I get away without darkening them. Do a bit of sail. So I'm adding a bit of blue, and it's just too fresh. I'm gonna mix a little bit of burnt sienna with that blue. So this ultramarine blue and burnt sienna just to tone it down. Where else can I add blue? Well, I have it on my palette. So maybe I should have a ruler in hand here, but I'll try to do a straight line. Maybe a joint one. I used to think that you have to do all the straight lines, you know, but now I bring a little ruler for outdoor painting. What are you trying to prove? The kind of more purpley shade for this buildings, that side of the roof is catching cooler light. So you can see I'm not really that close to it. I could just paint this whole scene from my head, but I do look at the picture. But I'm not trying not to be a slave to it, you know. I'm trying to kind of, you know, see what I like about it, and what I don't, I can just leave. So I want this part a bit darker. No, maybe this is not working. Maybe it's too dark. So I'm just adding a bit of water so you can still lift this fresh layer when you react quickly. Because if you wait until it dries out, it also was going to lift then the layer underneath, unfortunately. I'll just do a bit lighter. It's going to darken this up. I usually work a little bit larger, even outdoors. Because it's just, I don't know, it's just the way I started, and I just, yeah, let's do larger paintings. I find the smaller one is just not, you know, I just, maybe my eyesight is not as good as I would like it to be, but I don't see as much detail. So just notice we have this, whatever that is called, we'll find out from someone in the listening. But where the sail is rolled, you know, and it's when it's mooring
Cover on the mast.
on the mast. Yeah,
Yeah, I sound official now.
very good. Can go sailing.
Someone is absolutely going to correct me in a moment.
There's some serious sailors listening. So I'm adding lighter color underneath, and I just want to add a bit of red into it, so it's more, you know, there's more variety of grays. I think I kind of courage that picture, so I don't want to see the mast itself. There's some writing on it. So I suggest this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'll let those layers that I'm kind of working, because they're still damp, to soak in, and I'm going to start working a little bit more on the water. And for that I just want to use much thicker paint, and let's call it a layer 3, where I'm kind of using very little water. And as you know, maybe you don't know if you don't paint in gouache, gouache is quite sticky medium, you know. It's when you have your white, it's just like, you know, it's like it doesn't want to leave your brush in a way.
Yes,
It
I have
kind
found
of,
that white is the worst offender of that.
yeah, it's really like, you know, like it just doesn't want to leave. So what I sometimes do, like, you know, because I just get sick of kind of like it feels like I'm trying to shake it off the brush. I just kind of add some water, but it's good to stick with your lighter. Like if you decide, yeah, this is your lighter layer and you need lighter color, you know, keep working and eventually they'll give in. The gouache will give in. So I'm starting adding some, I suppose that's what's going to be water. So this is still wet, but it's not going to affect this, the layer I'm doing now, because it's so thick. So even if I have some wet wash beside it, it's not going to affect it. I added a bit of light blue and a bit of yellow, so it's kind of like a greeny kind of pistachio kind of color mix. I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera. So I'm gonna only use that in the distance, because it feels to me like the water is that color in a distance. And I'm saying feels because, you know, we all know color is, you know, I have a picture printed here and probably looks totally different when you guys see it. And, you know, it's how we perceive color, really.
Right. Yeah, because I can tell in your palette that it's got the additional, like the blue and the green added, but once you put it on the paper, to me, it just looks white.
It looks white, yeah, 'cause it's the lightest color now, and it probably will be. But I add a tiny bit of blue, a little bit more, so it's kind of more into like maybe turquoisey kind of shade. And I'm just being a little bit more careful with this, because I want to leave the reflections in here. So I'm watching the picture, and you see how little of that you can kind of imagine. You don't see it yet, but there's very little of that first wash would be there, you know. But you can actually kind of leave those little bits kind of showing through. And
Mhm.
that's because it was painted in one layer and kind of same shade all over. It just will leave this nice little effect, you know, like unify the whole picture. I have to shorten this. I'm dipping my brush a little bit in water. I always give in eventually because it just feels like the gouache is just not. It's just so sticky. And if you paint with oils, I imagine it can be quite annoying to get in the gouache and fight with it that way. So I'm adding a little bit of magenta and really adding the light blue, so the color kind of darkens. We're going a little bit lower, and I can always cover that again. So I'm trying to not overthink in my choices, you know, stick with the first instinct. And I could be wrong; it could be a little bit too dark, but you know, I can go again and correct it. Tiny bit of water, just a little bit more control. So I'm kind of painting in a negative way.
Mhm.
We're trying to leave, and you know, I cannot, or maybe tiny little sketch, maybe a little bit I can see, but very little of my initial sketch is visible. So you know, that's why sometimes I just don't bother because I know there'll be so little of it left very soon. I like this little kind of little corner here, and there's something reflecting in it. In a way, it would be much easier to do if I actually painted from light to dark. But you know, that's not what we paint. We like a challenge.
And are you trying to use like a dry brush technique to like
I tried for this to look different, you know. So like I like this to stay like very watery, and you know, and sometimes it doesn't work for me because maybe I went wrong shade and I cover it in the end. But this is my aim. I want to leave the first layer visible, you know, because that's what I for years loved about watercolor, that you had this kind of mix in the first layer. So I'm trying to get the best of both worlds, get a little bit of opaqueness and you know, yeah, I do like that effect, you know.
yeah. And I have not been paying attention to the time. We have about 15 minutes left, just a little bit more than that.
Right. I also wasn't paying attention. So, okay. So I basically gradually starting with that lightest color of the water, which was just mostly white, tiny bit of light and a little bit of yellow, and I started adding lighter blue, and then introduce a little bit of magenta into it as well, and getting darker and darker because that's what my reference looks like, and
Mhm.
that's what I really see when I paint water. So it is usually the closest to you, it feels darker. I think I probably cover here because it's just gonna get like too much of an exercise trying to get those reflections. And in the end, I want these strokes to look nice and free. And if you just try and be too careful when you're painting, they're not gonna look like that. They're not gonna look free.
Yeah, I'm definitely too careful.
And the one thing, one good way of getting less careful is just using bigger brush, because it just straight away forces you to kind of forget about detail.
Right.
But then with bigger brush for gouache, I feel like you know, you just work so much, you know, it just literally don't want to leave the palette, and you know, it gets so sticky. So and I think that's the reason most of gouache painters or use work very small in gouache, because it's just really hard to do something bigger because it just doesn't want to leave the palette or leave the tube. But I'm going to switch to maybe a slightly bigger brush. This one is a little bit wider. So I can finish up here even darker. And so I added more blue, and I'm adding tiny bit of 𝗲𝗁𝗀. So as you can see, I'm not using a limited palette, and now I used it for many years, and I feel like once I've done my homework, I've learned my colors. Now I can mix what I want.
Right.
But you know, it's always a good practice to use limited palette. If you feel a little bit feel overwhelmed by color, you know, but best way I would say is, you know, stick with fewer colors and try squeeze as much out of them as you can, and then slowly introduce colors that you feel you're missing. You can see like this kind of comes alive a little bit when you add the water. There's some bows in here that I totally ignored when I was sketching it, so I want to add them now. So I'm using just ultramarine mixed with burnt sienna, really dark. There's a dark boat there. I'll add it there. And now I can look at the boats in comparison with the whole, you know, the scene, and I can see they're maybe slightly dark. This one is probably okay, maybe it could be lighter, and that happens all the time because it's gouache, so it dries all different ways, not the way you want it. So I'm gonna go over this, and I don't want it to be too light either. So we just having nice little balance of colors. So I mixed ultramarine blue and magenta and a bit of white, so it gives me a nice little purpley shade. And I'm gonna add a tiny bit of yellow just to finish that. We actually talked about a reflection. I can see a little bit of lighter, maybe yellow color bouncing off from the water. I'm gonna do the same because now this one is lighter, so I'm gonna do the same for the other boat in the distance. I'm mixing more yellow with this one because it feels to me there's a lot of light there. A bit of pinky color as well. So I always remember it will dry out in the different color. So lighter colors into darker. So it still should be okay. But you know, I can always do another layer. And I'm gonna do the same. But coming closer and closer to the viewer, the boats are getting, or the perception of, because they're all white, but you know, it feels like they're darker.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm using more thinner paint now, so you can, when it dries, you're going to be able to see a little bit of the color from underneath as well. I'm mixing ultramarine only with white, just getting nice fresh bluish. Some details in here on the boat. Well, that part at the back is definitely in the background is definitely dry. So I can start adding a little bit more detail there. So I'm gonna switch to rigger brush. And I'm using the same mix I had for the boat to add the mast. And sometimes they work out well, and other times with a shaky hand. And you just have to wipe it off and do it again. And I've done many paintings, I actually forgot to paint them. Because I'm just so fascinated by the reflections in the water. I just don't see the mast. And I don't see this one. And I'm gonna just mix some darker colors. I'm mixing my ultramarine with burnt sienna again, and a tiny bit of white because I don't want it to be too dark. So I'm doing some details in the background. So I'm just straightening up some edges. Maybe need to be done. There's some little details there. I don't know. There's some sand in the picture, but it's gone. So I'm not painting it. There was just some building done in the harbor. Drenching probably. I want to add some water at the end, and I quite like how those washes here look like, so I'm just going to leave them alone. And I'm switching back to the smaller brush and mix yellow with tiny bit of blue and tiny bit maybe burnt sienna, just to give me some kind of greenish color. Maybe need some white as well. Let's see. I'll just add some grass. It does need some white. More yellow and white. And a bit of orange maybe. Yeah, just it will brighten up. It just that part of the grass is actually the sun is hitting it, so it looks nice and bright. And it's the same on this side. That's just a little highlight. As you can see, it's not really, I'm not measuring it that it's exactly precise, because I do like that about the painting, that it's kind of loose and more suggestive. But in the end, it is looking like a place, I know. There's some whiter things, lighter colors. So sometimes it's, for me, it's just when adding detail, it's trying to look at it and just in a way, like not analyzing what it is, but like quickly kind of putting on the paper, as a shape, rather than thinking, oh, is it a car, is it a boat, just a shape, dark or light, or mid value. I'm gonna add some water to their sea just behind those buildings, and it's kind of probably, it's very washed out because the sun was coming from this side, but I want it to be visible, so I'm just adding a bit of a line of turquoise. Is that horizon straight? I don't know. We'll find out. Usually it's not. Cover that part as well. So I want some more of that. I think it should be a little bit darker on this side. So I'll just add a bit more blue. That's tiny little things you can add. And the white on the boat is drying, so I'm gonna work a little bit more details on the boat so they start looking like boats. I'm mixing a bit of black with ultramarine blue, quite dark color. Just try to do that. I paint with the whole. One day I will learn all the vocabulary.
We've got a little less than 5, well, no, a little more than 5 minutes.
Okay, so that's actually perfect. So adding some details, and this is totally opaque paint at the end, because
Very little water, right?
Yeah, very little water, because I want it to be dark. I don't want to disturb whatever I have underneath. And but just adding those little dark bits, you make the painting straight away start looking like it's supposed to. It's very shaky, but I can come back to it and put on a bit of darker bits. I definitely want to darken part of this, because this is my foreground. And I've done those fenders reflecting in the water, but I haven't painted them themselves. It would be nice to add them, and I try to always get them like a very little brush strokes, like you would paint in watercolors nearly. You don't want to like overwork. That's kind of stayed with my watercolor practice. And that just gives me pleasure that I've done something in a few brush strokes rather than doing it over. And there's small ones here. Sometimes I'm guessing where everything is, maybe from my memory, but it's nice to look at the photo, actually see things are really there. I'm switching back to rigger, and after using the same color, and add some more details. And recently I started working with coloring pencils, but just not to give too many techniques and too many details. I'm not showing this, but often now I would use coloring pencils just to add those final details, just because it just feels more natural when you're holding in your hand. And yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it took me a while kind of understanding what will actually sit well. You know, it has to be quite a soft pencil. So it sits well on top of gouache, you know. And also, like, very important thing to know with gouache, you know, you can build up a lot of layers, and, you know, gouache is very, you know, you can do a couple of them, but eventually you will hit time that you've hit a wall, and, you know, it'll start lifting the color that's underneath. So if I continue adding in here on this very thick paint here, another layer on top, it's just it's not going to work very well. So what you could do is just, you can apply a bit of water and wash it off with your tissue and reapply paint on top of it if you just try and cover something totally. Because even when it dries out, then sometimes it can be this, I don't know, you've probably seen it, it crackles the white color.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you can actually see it, so it's just not good. But overall look. So I'm doing very loose kind of, and you see it took me forever to kind of get into it. Because sometimes, you know, with the rigger, like in here, you get too thick of a line, so you have to kind of go for it and do lots of lighter and kind of barely touch it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's visible on the screen.
It is. Yeah. This has been
But,
fascinating watching this come together.
yeah, so it's always the last few little bits. When I'm adding some, and there's some flags in the distance, like the part of the place.
So Jim is asking, do you ever blend the dry opaque paint by feathering lightly with water?
Well, I generally don't like that effect, so I don't. But yeah, I've tried. I tried it, you know, at first, you know, what would do. So I suppose if you made a mistake or you wanted to blend these, but personally, I like when the blending comes in by, I suppose adding, you know, it's a visual blending, not physical blending, you know. So by adding a similar color but a little bit darker, you have that visual blending. So that water is visually getting darker, but I didn't spend time to smooth it out because that's not what I like. But yeah, it can be done with, if that's your thing, it can be done with a gouache very easily. I feel like what I like about any paint, watercolor, gouache, acrylic, is the freshness. So if I don't have that fresh look, I just don't think it's successful. So that's why I'm kind of obsessing about the layers being, you know, like looking the fresh when they're leaving something already done first, and not doing too much detail and doing it in a loose way, because I love the freshness of the paint, you know, and looseness,
Yeah.
and the freedom. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, you know. So but yeah, if you're asking Jim about if it's possible, or definitely, but I don't do it myself. No. Adding a bit of lighter color here, and I'm not switching to different brush. There's some lights in here. So this white isn't, it's a mix a little bit with water and tiny bit of blue. So it's not as sharp. So that the reason for this, if I just wanted something specifically, like maybe in here to stand out, I can then use even thicker white, maybe a tiny bit of yellow to it, and then, you know, I won't have a contrast here with the background, but it's possible then to do.
Well, everybody, we're coming up on time. I dropped Kate's website and her Instagram in the chat. Be sure to check it out, 𝗏𝗏_𝗏 and at @Kate_Kos on Instagram. She's got a lot of great stuff in there. You can check her out. Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. This was fascinating watching how you approach this from your watercolor background. I'm definitely going to have to try this.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to see what you create.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to share with you guys before we leave today is there was a lot going on in the chat about our Gouache live event, which is coming up on August 23rd. We've got Scott Christensen co-hosting with Eric. We've got Danny Folkman, Tiffany Mang, Judd Mercer, Angela Sung, and Michelle 𝗚cie𝗂𝗶𝗵𝗴, who are all going to be joining us. Going to be super fun talking about gouache and landscape painting. The other thing I wanted to share, and we don't have, like, this just came about, so I don't have any information on it yet, but on the 23rd of July, so we are looking at, today's the 7th, so in 2 weeks, on the 23rd, that's a Wednesday, we are going to be doing a gouache webinar, and we've got 𝗏𝗁 Art Materials who's going to be joining us for that, and Sarah and I are going to host a webinar. It's about, the basics of gouache, what it is, what you can do with it, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a precursor to Gouache Live. So for anybody who, like me, is new at gouache, doesn't know what you can do with it, how to use it, all that kind of stuff, we're going to be hosting a webinar. So mark that date. It's going to be the 23rd of July. It's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I'll try to get some more details for you guys, get a nice little graphic and everything somewhere for you guys to sign up sometime this week. So but keep that on your calendars. Otherwise, we've got Gouache Live on the 23rd, which I am super excited about. Loving gouache lately. So thank you guys all so much for joining us. Thank you again, Kate. I'm going to put her back on screen as she finishes her painting. This is such a great opportunity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and I'm trying to find that. I don't even have. Here we go. It's this one. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get notified when we go live. You can also follow Eric on Instagram. I'm also on Instagram. It's at @𝗏𝗏_art because I had to be difficult. So check us out. Follow us. I'm going to be here all week. We've got a great lineup for you guys this week. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for having me.